Hi, good morning, everybody. So I want to just take a minute to just kind of let you know a little bit about myself. I am Dr. Amber Cargill. Please call me Amber. I am a licensed clinical and sports psychologist, and I currently work at the NFLPA, so it's the NFL Players Association, which is the union that works for the NFL players. And so in my role, my responsibilities are to ensure that our players have what they need in order to maximize their performance on and off the field. A lot of the time, what that equates to is really finding wellness resources, things related to mental health, and really working to destigmatize what it means to focus on your mental health. Our guys are resilient guys, and they are sort of in many ways leading the way in terms of being able to normalize help-seeking behavior with mental health. So in terms of my background, I did my undergrad at UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina. Go Heels if anybody's on the call. And I did my graduate training, got my doctorate at Rutgers University in New Jersey. So my training is as a clinical psychologist. And so for many years, I treated patients just like psychologists do, but I also got training in sports psychology. And so what that means is that, you really sort of are working with athletes to figure out the best way to help maximize performance. But oftentimes what we know is that when issues are coming up with athletes, it's very rare that it's only within the sports realm that something's going on. Usually there's something outside, or there's an anxiety thing that may be pre-existing or just maybe not as prominent outside, but it shows up on the field or on the court. And it's helpful to kind of know all that information so that you can help treat it on both sides. So I did my residency at the University of Oklahoma in their athletic department. And for the last, before I started at the NFLPA, I was working at George Washington University in Washington, DC before I came to the PA. So that's a little bit about me. I'm happy to field any questions that you might have related to that background, pursuing a degree in psychology or in sports psychology. I know it's a field that is getting a lot more attention lately, and so I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Lana, can you go to the next slide?
Oh, sorry.
You're fine. Is there a lag?
Okay.
Is it up? Because it's not lag. It's not pulled up on mine.
Let me stop share and try it again.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So just really quickly before we get started, I do appreciate questions. And so, one of the things that we teach in psychology, especially when we're working with athletes, is that you have to have your mind in the moment. And I take that approach with presentations as well. If you're thinking about something I said a minute ago or 2 minutes ago, then you're not sort of focused on what I'm currently saying. And so I'd much rather you just ask the question and that we can answer it so that you can sort of take in everything that I'm saying throughout the entire time that we're together. So please feel free to put questions in the Q&A box, and I will be asking for responses to some questions in the chat box. So please help me out and participate. All right, so when you leave today, I want you to sort of walk away with 3 things. The first thing is I want to talk about what stress means and how it affects your brain and body. I also want to make sure that we talk about what 2020 has meant in terms of stress, because we all know 2020 has been what it's been. I want you to also be able to recognize ways to manage stress. I'm going to talk about unproductive and productive ways of doing that. But I want you to sort of think about the ways in which you've done it. And I want you to especially think about ways that you've done it in the past versus what's you may need to do to switch it up moving forward. And then at the end, we're going to sort of create a plan about how to win the mental game. And I think it's important to, again, just remember that we're sort of thinking a lot about what has worked in the past, because we want to rely on things that are tried and true. But we also know, as we'll talk about today, that 2020 has been difficult, and it's sometimes rendered some of our ways of managing, we can't do it. So like being social and being around people, we just couldn't do it in 2020. Or the stress might be so high that you're not able to actually make good use of the things that might have worked before. So we'll talk through all of that, and hopefully by the end you'll have a good plan in place to manage the rest of 2020. Okay, next slide.
Okay. There.
Perfect. So what I'm going to need you to bring is an open mind. So this is going to require that you are thoughtful about what we're talking about, and you sort of are reflecting on what your own practices are, and then just wanting to make sure that anything that we talk about, that you work to kind of think about how you can apply it to yourself. And then at the end, you're going to need your cell phone. So I'm not one of those folks who tells you to turn your cell phone off, keep it on. It doesn't bother me, but just make sure you have it available, and that you have your email app pulled up. So when we get to the activity, that you can go ahead and just have that ready to go. All right, next slide. Okay, so I want to start us off. I want to get on the same page about what it means when we use the word stress, okay? So I'm going to start us off with some simple definitions. Stress is how you feel when you're faced with a challenge, plain and simple. I don't need to get into any other things. Just think about anytime a challenge comes your way, stress is the response that you have as a result. Coping, when I say coping, I'm basically saying how you manage when you're feeling stressed. And then coping mechanisms are the specific strategies that you use to reduce the stress in your life, okay? If you've taken a class in undergrad, you know that if you've taken a psychology class, you might know that there's such thing as good stress and bad stress. We're gonna start with the bad stress first, because quite frankly, 2020 hasn't delivered much of the good stress. It's been really overt in the bad stress. But we're sort of going to walk it through, because I think it's important to sort of recognize the extent to which 2020 and life in general causes us to have lots of stress responses to the challenges that we face. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to get to the chat box, please. So tell me, why is it important that we talk about stress? Okay, I see one response. Any other thoughts?
Come on, Amber, Diana, Justin, Kenya, and Payne. You guys got to participate too.
All right, we'll give it one more minute. Okay, so we don't want to let it bottle up. It helps to relieve any pent up emotions. Those are two really good reasons. I'm going to be very blunt. It helps to keep from irrational emotions. Yep, I think that's also a very, very good point. Understand how to keep it from taking over our lives, staying productive. Absolutely. These are all very, very good responses. I'm going to be a little more blunt. I'm going to say the reason it's important to talk about stress is because it can kill you. Okay. I want to be very, very clear. It can kill you in multiple ways. Let's talk about careers. In my work before I got to the NFLPA, I worked at a university, and I can't tell you how many times students would not be able to finish their semesters because stress overwhelmed them. That they would then subsequently have a really hard time finishing their degrees, which then alters their career trajectory as a result. Okay, so stress can literally kill your career. When you're under stress, you can't concentrate and you can't function effectively. So if you're in school, you can't learn the same way, you can't learn as efficiently, you can't You can't concentrate. You can't retain information like you need to, which then builds more stress. So it can certainly hurt you academically, which can then effectively kill any ideas or prospects of the careers that you want. Stress can also, as we know, really exacerbate pre-existing mental health concerns. So let's say you were a little anxious before or a little depressed before. If you add in a huge stressor, it can blow it up basically and make it so that what was a manageable condition can become unmanageable. So stress is certainly something that is very detrimental, but let's also be honest, it can actually kill you, right? The suicide rate right now is that there are about 129 deaths every day in the United States because of suicide. And those are numbers that I pulled before COVID. I don't even know if we have the numbers since COVID has happened. My guess is that it has maybe slightly increased because of what COVID has done to us, but I can't be 100% sure, but 129 people every day is a lot of people. The addiction rate in our country is about 20% of people use drugs or misuse prescription drugs. That's what we in my world really look at substance use as is, obviously we want to treat it as if it's a medical condition. We don't want to shame people for what they're doing, but we also know that a lot of folks self-medicate. It's a way to sort of relieve symptoms of other things. And so we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about the ways in which we're using substances to sort of alleviate the stress. If we think about heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure, these are all things that can literally kill you, okay? So, I want to sort of emphasize the seriousness of what stress could mean in our lives and the importance of making sure we take preemptive action and intentional action to reduce it. So I want to just end on a little bit more of a positive note. We can avoid being killed by stress. This is one thing that we can make sure that we can put things in place so that the amount of stress that we have in our lives can be reduced and that we are better prepared to deal with stress when it comes our way. Okay, next slide.
Do you see the next slide?
I don't. Yeah, this is the issue that I was talking about earlier. It's sort of like a strange, you would think Zoom would have worked that out by now.
Right. Okay.
All right, so let's talk about 2020. You can go to the next slide. All right, I'm gonna play a video for you all. I'm gonna see if I can, so Lana, can you maybe stop screen sharing?
Yep.
Okay, and then I'm going to play it from my end. Share my screen. Of course, that tab isn't up there. Give me 1 second, guys. Sorry about the delay. We are all trying to adjust to this virtual, there we go, virtual world still. 6 months, 7 months, going on 7 months in. All right. Okay, Lana, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
The pandemic has really made my mental health a lot worse. This is the most anxious I've ever been, I think, in my entire life, just with everything, kind of like school and then managing my time, trying to get things done while I'm also freaking out about how bad the pandemic is.
We also have some data that has come out more recently that's suggesting that there's been a particular impact on college students, that they're seeing higher levels of depression, they're having financial insecurity, which is also leading to mental health problems. And this is concerning because before the pandemic, we knew that college students were increasingly having mental health concerns. So now you have the pandemic and we have a population that's particularly in greater need for mental health services.
I would say for me, before the whole pandemic, started, I was going through a really tough time personally, and kind of falling into the whole pandemic, I just kind of said, like I'm done, like I give up, like why is this happening?
A lot of just like the stress from my family falls on me because I am basically I'm like the oldest and I speak the language and my parents help me out with my tuition, and so I feel like I owe them a lot, and then they feel like I need to help them a lot.
Many of our students have backgrounds that are fraught with frustrations and challenges and so forth.
My parents are very staunchly Republicans. I'm bisexual, bipolar. I'm also very progressive. I had a sociology and anthropology minor. Obviously, those are going to come up with some progressive topics, and I had to very strategically hide what I was doing. I have to hide the books that I read. Again, it's not nearly as bad as not having food or being abused, but it is a stressor.
Our data.
Okay. So can we head to the chat really quickly? And I want to sort of talk through what your reactions are to seeing that video. Can you relate? And then what are some reasons that you feel like COVID-19 has been so stressful for yourselves? So we'll take a couple minutes.
Don't be afraid to share.
Yeah, I'm seeing both of these. So I think, is that Kenya? Having all these problems and then having them by yourself and not being able to easily communicate and connect, or not feeling like your ability to connect is as safe, sort of having to do things, especially if you spent time back at your parents' house. You can't sort of be off somewhere quietly having a conversation over a glass of wine or over a beer. Your parents might be able to hear what you're saying. So the conversations are not as protected, and just not feel. And if you're someone who's an extrovert, the virtual space isn't it does it, but it doesn't do enough. We extroverts tend to get their energy from being around other people, and so it makes perfect sense. I see forced to live on my own, first time, very stressful. Yep. And the financial piece is obviously something that on many fronts is so stressful, right? It's not knowing what's going to happen with the economy, particularly for you guys, just thinking about what your job prospects are going to be, and just knowing that the pandemic has sort of changed the landscape probably for a long time in terms of what jobs are going to look like. No one imagined a year ago that everyone would be working from home, right? There was actually a commercial real estate boom because people were buying up more office spaces because it was before 2020. So I definitely agree with that. Let's see what else we got here. Being away from my family just adds to the stress. Yep. Not having my person seems amazing. Back to not being as connected. Absolutely. So yeah, so I think based on what I'm seeing, it's the lack of connection obviously is something that was really, really impactful. The disruption to your routine. I saw somebody saying they just felt like they got into the swing of things and felt very connected, and then sort of were uprooted really quickly. But I can't, I'm a psychologist, so I have to sort of put this out there. We're talking about life and death on a daily, if not moment to moment basis, especially in the early parts of this. And we as humans are wired to protect ourselves at any cost. And our brains are so good at that. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And so when you're constantly bombarded with these reminders of potential death or harm coming your way, it does something to us, right? So I just want to reiterate that underneath these particular or specific things that might be relatable to you in your situation, there's also this underlying process that your brain is going through, just trying to file away this concept that your life could literally be in danger because of this virus. So I just wanted to put that out there too. All right, Lana, next slide.
Okay, 1 second.
It's the one before, yep.
Yep.
All right, so I have another short video to share, and we're gonna head to the chat after the video. Okay, Lana, I think I need you to stop sharing. This is,
It's all good.
yeah. Okay.
Black man and a white man can go seek mental health because we're committed to stopping the stigma surrounding mental health so we can take the shame and the blame out of discussing mental illnesses. Today, we're looking at how racism and the coronavirus have affected mental health in the Black community. Only 1 in 3 Black Americans who need mental health care receive it. Psychiatrist Dr. Jess Clemens uses her Ask Dr. Jess social media account. She's great to break down barriers and provide more access to help. She joins us only on CBS This Morning from New Orleans. Dr. Jess, it's so good to see you. You are the perfect person for this conversation today. Because between COVID and heightened racial tensions, I think about what Black Americans are living through these days. Listen, one of those would be enough to put you in the fetal position, but you've got the one.
Lana, is it freezing up on your end?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay. All right, let me see if it comes back and give it 1 more second.
Be enough to put you in the fetal position, but you've got the 1-2 punch.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing, but it looks
Talk
like my
why
computer's
this is
up.
having such a big effect on mental health in the Black community. It seems obvious, but maybe not so much for some people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you for having me today. You know, I think what you're pointing out is something that Black Americans know intuitively, right? We know that we're always hit the hardest and we have the worst outcomes, right? But there are a lot of studies that actually have looked at how racism specifically affects the mental health of those within the Black community. Right now, thinking about, you know, George Floyd and police killings, there was a study in 2018 that looked at what's the impact in terms of mental health for Black Americans who are living and observing unarmed Black people being killed. And what we find is that for the larger Black population, that equates to about 55 million poor mental health days, which affects the economy and obviously affects the quality of life. And what we do know about COVID and natural disasters is that it tends to lead to an increase in the number of new cases of mental illness. And so, of course, when Black people get exposed to things like this, we are expected to get hit the hardest, right? So we're expected to not only present with symptoms, but also have nowhere to go because of the lack of access and the stigma and barriers associated with it.
Yeah, Dr. Jess, you've all.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there since we lost a little bit of time. But the gist of what she says is that essentially the toll that, and this is backed up by other studies too, that the toll of watching folks get killed by police, or and the sort of what is becoming more overt out there racist, prejudice, discriminatory acts that are happening has similar impact as folks who are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, there's a movement to talk about race-based stress disorder. And so while folks of color are more likely to be impacted by that, what we do know is that because these things are being posted online and we're all witnessing it, there's a hint of that for everybody. It doesn't matter what color you are, that you are sort of becoming privy to some elements of trauma by witnessing these things. So I didn't do her any justice in terms of summarizing what she said. I encourage you to look at the rest of the clip if you want to sort of know more about it. But I wanted to kind of head back to the chat and sort of ask what about the social unrest has been so stressful.
I know for myself, it's really more concerned about my friends' safety and just how I can be a better ally for them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's the first one on my list. Once I hear from everybody else, that's a real fear, both because depending on your skin color, if it's a fear of your own life, the safety of your life, but for many others, it's the growing awareness that something not good could happen to a loved one or a friend, and being very scared of that possibility. Yeah, it feels very tiring. It feels inescapable. It's going to be more and more of this going on. Uncertainty and the expectation of returning to normality. Absolutely. So a couple of the things that we know to be true, again, is the fear of the safety concerns. The concern and it's interesting. I think the generation now. I'm an old millennial. And so even though we're not that much older than you all, the times have changed so much in between when we were in college versus where you all are now, that I think you all probably grew up with a president who was not white. And that certainly changes the way that you perceive things. And, so I think that you all are coming into college and coming into this space with a lot more awareness than I did and my predecessors did. And what's gone on this summer and what's been going on for the last couple of years has really started to be shine the light a lot more prominently on some of the things that have been happening for centuries. And so that awareness brings a lot of feelings and a lot of stress, right? Like it's something that I think that we could, if we wanted to, we could put it on the back burner because it's not necessarily as immediately life-threatening for everybody as COVID is, but it's something that, again, as you're watching and hearing these things happen, your brain is processing. Even if you're sort of putting it to the back burner, your brain is processing, and that's energy going to this topic. So I just wanted to put that out there too. Lana, next slide.
I think it just times out sometimes. Oh my gosh.
That's a little bit, it's frustrating. I still think there should be a way to be able to toggle back and forth. So.
Right. Okay.
All right. And then I think that there's everything else. So on here I have Kobe Bryant died. That was a huge impact to some people. obviously Ruth Bader Ginsburg just died, Chadwick Boseman died, you know, three sort of prominent folks that for many folks, including folks of color, were just to have a sort of civil rights icon, a basketball hero, and then an actual depiction of a superhero, of the first Black superhero, die in the same year is just a lot. It's a lot. We have obviously the wildfires going on in California, which are awful. And you know, I think it's one thing to think what's going on in California, but what happened over here in DC, where I am, is that the smoke came across the country. And so we're very much impacted by what's going on in California. We had murder hornets, sports were canceled, politics as usual. There's nothing more to say there. And then the economy tanked. I know that there are more things. And I wish that we had time to kind of go through all the things that sort of happened on a global, or at least on a country nationwide scale. But you know, these are just some of the few. The murder hornets maybe turned out to not beat so much, but when it first came up, it was like, oh my God, what is next? It was just another indication of like everything is going wrong this year. So my hope is that, you know, we are sort of Lenny, go to the next slide. I'm sorry. So my hope is that we're going to start talking about a little about ways to cope, right? And ways that you might have coped before 2020. So I'm going to fly through the next couple slides just so that we can make sure we get to what to do, because I really want to spend some time talking about that. So I wanted you to think about what you might have done before 2020. If you notice, I have a picture of like a classroom on a college campus, and then I have a guy sort of looking anxiously at his phone. These are some of the things that I thought might have been things that would have predominantly caused you stress before 2020 happened. Your grades, whether you were going to secure an internship, making sure your financial aid was okay, studying for your exams, what major are you going to choose? Is it the right one? Are you making the right choice? And then in terms of being a person, those were mostly focused on being a student. In terms of being a person, family concerns, which some of you have talked about, your friends, significant other or others, your finances, your personal health, just sort of everyday run-of-the-mill, I say run-of-the-mill, but they're not, stressors that I think if we look back on 2019 and 2018, these were the things that were occupying a lot of our time and maybe stressing us out before. And then 2020 happened, and we just had to sort of prioritize what was the more stressful of it. But there's, when you look at these things are actually still very, very, very much important. So can you go to the next slide, please? So I want to sort of just kind of think through ways in which we generally cope with stress. And so I put a couple things up here. Now, I like to think about things on a continuum. I don't like to think about things as right and wrong, because I think that we make choices that are that to the point, or at the point at which they stop working for us, work for us to some extent. So even if it's something that you may judge as inherently bad, I'm not necessarily going to label it that, because sometimes getting away from everybody might look bad to everybody else, but it's exactly what you need to do, right? It may not in the long run be as productive as sort of confronting and kind of dealing with things, but in the short run, it might be helpful. You know, if you look at the left side of the screen where I have least productive, you know, the bad thing in terms of what psychologists do is that some of those things over there are a lot more fun and a lot more immediately gratifying and immediately effective. So drinking helps to numb things, right? Like you don't necessarily have to think about things. You become more impulsive. You kind of let things out when you're drinking. It may lead to other problems, and it may not actually allow you to deal with the problems that you're having, but you can't ignore that it's effective in some ways. You know, smoking, certainly if you're having trouble sleeping, smoking can certainly help you to sleep. Is it affecting the quality of your sleep? Absolutely it is. Is it leading you to more bad sleep later on, the next day and the next day? Absolutely it is. But in the moment, it is effective, right? And so I want to be clear about when we're thinking about our coping strategies, we don't necessarily want to think about it in black and white terms as good and bad. We want to think about how productive they are over the long run. And some things that are not as productive tend to be effective in the short run. So I want to make sure that that's clear. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So what we want, so if you remember from that psych class, we talked about bad stress and good stress. And so there is a such thing as good stress, okay? It's called eustress, whereas bad stress is called distress. We've all heard of distress. Eustress is essentially your response to a challenge without the presence of a perceived threat. So remember earlier when I was saying that our brains do a really good job of perceiving threats, and so we respond to that to protect ourselves. This is one in which you are faced with a challenge, but there's no threat present, right? And so if you can think about times when you've really sort of pushed yourself and you felt like you were sort of in a good mental state, you were in a state of flow, but you might have been working hard. These are times when they're eustress. So some of the things they call things that are positive stress would be traveling. You are ultimately, it's stressful to be in a new environment, but you are pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. And there's not a perceived threat there. Buying a home or getting married or having a kid, there's no the perceived threats aren't there. So your life isn't in danger or your livelihood isn't in danger, but it's still stressful nonetheless. What that does is it actually activates positive parts of your brain. It activates motivation, it can activate some energy, and in short bursts, sometimes it can help your memory, right? So we want to be able to help make the distinction between when something is a challenge versus when something is a threat. Right now in 2020, here's the bad news. In 2020, because we've gotten so many threats, we are more prone to perceive things as threats. And so what it's going to require is that we take time to think about, what is this that's stressing me out? What is the threat to me? What is the harm that comes if it goes the way that my brain is telling me it's going to go? And am I equipped and capable of managing that outcome? A lot of times the answer is yes, right? I'm not talking about COVID. I'm not talking about police brutality and racism. I'm not talking about those things. Our daily sort of life stressors, we are usually equipped to deal with them if we stop and think about it. And so I just want to be clear about making sure that one important thing to do is making sure that we're making the distinction between what is a threat and what is not. Next slide. All right, so I want to talk really quickly about ways to sort of be intentional, and in addition to sort of making sure that we're making the distinction between what a threat is and what a threat isn't, that we are actively doing things that are going to work to our advantage. So the first is control. And I know people say control is bad. Yes, when you take it to the fullest extent, it is. But to the extent that you are able to control the people, places, and things that you surround yourself with, you are putting yourself in a much better position to be able to cope with the stress around you. I want you to be thoughtful about who you're spending your time with, what you're spending your time doing, and are these things contributing to any stress in your life? And to the extent that they are contributing to that stress, is that stress necessary to get you to the next step and next goal that you're trying to reach? The next thing is really big in sports psychology. It's called focusing on the process and not the outcome. So what that means is that, when you think about, in sports terms, we think about wins and losses. A win and a loss is an outcome, right? And we are all motivated to win. The problem with that is that our ability to win may not always be within our full control. And the minute we are focusing on things that are not within our control, we are allowing opportunities for more and more stress to creep in. So for example, whether you pass the test may be somewhat contingent on whether or not the person grading you has had enough coffee in the morning, right? If it's an essay, are they more likely to miss things? Are they more likely to grade harder? It doesn't matter. But did you do everything you needed to do in order to pass the test is the question that you should be answering. If the answer is no, then you can do something better next time. I hope that makes sense. The next one is prioritize yourself. I think this, what I appreciate about folks in college right now is that I think they've gotten this message a little bit more than, say, my generation did, which is take care of yourself. It doesn't mean be selfish. It doesn't mean to be self-centered. It means to ask yourself, what's in my best interest? Sometimes we do things for other people and we end up more stressed than they are. And that's because we were engaged in something that was not necessarily in our best interest. Okay. So I want to be clear about, the distinction between making sure it's in your best interest to be doing it. Because if you're not at your best self doing it, then you may not actually be as helpful doing it than as you'd like to be anyway. Watch your energy. I want you all to value your energy as you would value your own life, as you would value your parents' lives or your friends' life or somebody that you care about. It needs to be protected. And so making sure that you are thoughtful about the things that are taking your energy means that you are better able to cope with things when they come your way, because you just have more energy in place. And then finally, I call the last one kind of boss level coping, which is called acceptance. It's hard to do. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but basically what it's asking you to do is to accept things for how they are. Accept people for who they are. If they tell you who they are, you believe them and operate from that. What we often do is we hope people are different. We've seen something in people that would indicate that they are a different way, but and we like to focus only on that and not the full picture. It's easy for people to to do that, but in reality, people are complex and they may be both of those things. And so if you operate as if they're only one, then you're going to be stressed and you're going to be stressed and disappointed when they show the other side that they've already shown, right? And so if we take into account that people are all things, then we're doing ourselves a service of just sort of accepting things for how they are, so that we can move in the world in the way in which we need to move. All right, next slide. Okay, so really quickly, I know we are coming up really quick on the end of our time. So this is an accountability activity. So I want you to grab your phones, and I want you to open up your Gmail app or whatever app you use for email. And your subject line is going to be my 2020 stress plan. And so there's 3 sentence stems. If we have time to do all 3, great. If we don't, let's pick 1 or 2 of them that seem most relevant. So sentence stems are, me out, I am going to blank. I would like for the thing that I am going to would be something that is new, something that's different, something you have not tried yet, something that takes into account the heightened level of stress that we all are under, right? If reading books was the go-to thing before and it hasn't worked, is it time to switch it up on reading books? Is it time to pick a different place to read the books? Is it time to pick a different kind of book to read? We need to sort of expand the options during times like this, because we are certainly under, if you think about it, we're sort of physically and emotionally under attack right now. All right, the new coping mechanism I'm going to try is pick your choice, and the choices are, again, some of the ones that we talked about on the last slide. And then blank is the most stressful to me to overcome. I will. So why don't you pick 1 or 2 of those, and then you're basically sending it to yourself. And then once you do that, is there a raise your hand function? Well, I don't know if we're gonna have time to raise your hands, but so I just wanted to give you a couple minutes to do that. So there are 3 things that we're accomplishing with this task. The first is that when stress happens, our brains don't encode memories effectively. So my expectation is that you're not going to remember a lot of what we talked about today, which is fine. This is why we're doing this. You've written it down. And so by writing it down, you are actually having to process the information through another information system in your brain, which means that it's more likely to stick. Okay, which is why we oftentimes recommend journaling, because you have to have the thought, you have to put the thought through the systems in order to process how you're going to write it and how you want to say it. Then you have to get your motor skills together to actually put pen to paper, which is 3 ways that you're sort of processing the information, which actually does help to alleviate it. And then the third thing is rereading it is a level of accountability. So if you have this in your email and it pops up, and if you have the Boomerang app, you can send it so that it pops up in a week or it pops up in a year, whatever. But the more you reread, the more likely you are to be accountable to enacting that plan. Okay, next slide. And that's it for me. I know we are right on the edge here. But if there were any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and I appreciate your participation. And yeah, I'm happy to sort of field any questions there might be.
All right, we got a question from Kenya, and she asked, are there any apps you recommend to help with stress?
Yep. I would say Headspace is a good one. Calm is also another good one. For folks of color, there is the Liberate app, which is designed to also address, similar to Calm and Headspace, do some meditation, but also some reflecting on the unique experiences of people of color. It's called Liberate. Lumosity also has a meditation component, but it's also brain games. And so the more we're sort of keeping our brain engaged and working, the more we're actually sort of activating the brain, the parts of the brain that can get shut down during stressful times. So I think any of those, and people have different feelings about different kinds of apps. I would, I have no preference necessarily to convey, just test them out and see which ones work for you. All right, well, if there are no more questions, I really appreciate your time and attention and your thoughtful answers. And, I hope the takeaway here is prioritize yourself, take care of yourself, and just sort of recognize the magnitude of what we're living through right now. And that, the more we can sort of devote our attention and energy to the things that we have within our control, the better. I know that can be really hard at times. So I want you to be gentle with yourselves if you're not able to do it, right? It's just sort of the nature of the beast. But to the extent that you can put some energy toward that and towards yourself, the better.